Barbiero, and I'm talking on behalf of the whole young Italian entity group. We are a group of 6 young researchers that are trying to work on several aspects on NTDs. We promote and try to facilitate not only research projects on NTDs, but also we try to promote building of networks, both national and international networks on NTDs. We also have the objective of working on raising awareness with the aim of raising awareness beyond our very specialistic and tiny field of NTD people, so reaching a much wider population on the field of NTDs. And we also try to promote and facilitate interaction and collaboration with the policymakers on this field. So we are very happy and very excited to start this webinar, which, as already mentioned, is linked to the recent World NTD Day, and has the objective of bringing attention on NTDs with a wider perspective, which is not only and especially not a clinical perspective on this day, but which wants to include some very relevant elements that are strictly connected with NTDs, which are indeed climate change and global conflicts. So I give the word to Benedetta Rossi, which will introduce the first speaker. And as we agreed before, we will have 5 minutes after each presentation for any questions. Thank you all.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's a real pleasure for me to introduce Professor Gramenos Mastroianni, who I had the pleasure to meet during COP21 in Paris. Professor Mastroianni is the Senior Deputy Secretary General of the Union of the Mediterranean and a full member of the Club of Rome. He's a diplomat, professor, and a writer, and he has pioneered research and action on the social, geostrategic, and economic impacts on environmental change. He previously served at the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs as coordinator for the environment and head of the science policy interface, and has been a head negotiator on water, land, ocean, as well as a negotiator in the UNFCCC and Convention on Biological Diversity process. Today, he's here to introduce the topic of the webinar with a presentation entitled One Health, One Planet, One Justice, One Peace. Please, Professor Mastroianni, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm talking to you from Barcelona, from the premises of the Union for the Mediterranean. I have tens of presentations about climate conflicts and migrations, but this theme has now become kind of known. I will just sum it up very briefly because I would like to talk about something else. And the reason why I accepted this invitation is actually because I'm not here to present you something, but I'm here to ask for your help. And you will understand why at the end. The link has been disputed, but it's now absolutely certain. Climate change affects security in various ways. As I told you, I'm not going really to talk about this. You can consider that right now there are 71 open conflicts which have been recognized as being accelerated or caused by climate change. There are migrations going on, and it's inappropriate to call them migrations because they are forced population movements. We see the international ones, but the most relevant ones are the internal migrations, especially those from the countryside to the outskirts of the cities. All this affects health in various ways. Some are obvious, and I'm not going to devote too much time to them. But we need to make a distinction. Health as mere absence of pathologies, or health in a broader sense, which is portrayed by the concept of One Health. From the first perspective, what we have to take into account is that climate change affects health in a direct way. You know them, heat waves, the enlargement or displacing of epidemics areas. Then there are indirect ways. It affects ecosystem services which are primeval for health. For instance, humid areas which are fundamental for purifying water and many other things, and then also by causing conflicts, destabilization, etc. Obviously, a society which is destabilized by various causes, accelerated by climate change, is less in condition to take care of people's health. But all this is now very well known. It's non-interesting to go through these things. What I would like to talk about is health as a solution. And it's a solution for all the dimensions that you mentioned in your seminar. It's a solution for climate, it's a solution for justice, it's a solution for migration, it's a solution for security, and much more. And to do that, I would like to start from a field which is not exactly tropical diseases, but it's absolutely fundamental for health, which is nutrition. You might well be aware that some guy has devised a pyramid, and they have called it the food pyramid. It tells you, in principle, how you should eat to be, let's say, in good health. This pyramid has red meat and sugar at the top. Right below, a few proteins, other proteins from animal sources, but basically it says a healthy diet is composed of vegetables, fibers, and so on. Okay, this is very well known. You even find it in magazines that you read at the hairdresser. What is a little bit less known is that if you couple this pyramid with another pyramid, which is the impact on the environment of the production of each kind of food, they coincide almost perfectly in the sense that the more I consume in excess of food, which is detrimental to my health, if consumed in excess, I'm not predicating any veganism or vegetarianism, the more the production of this food has a heavy impact on the environment. And you are tempted to say, oh my God, what a coincidence in the sector of nutrition. But it's not a coincidence, and this correspondence, which we can describe as what's good for you is good for your planet, what's good for your planet is good for you, works in every single sector. You could, for instance, build your own transportation pyramid, and you will easily discover that the more you choose, if you have the possibility, the kind of transportation that keeps you healthy, in good shape, with good socialization, without the stress of traffic, the more it is sustainable and the more it leaves you with money in your pockets. It's easy to understand, for instance, that the healthiest shower, the shower that better protects your immune system, which is short, not too hot, and with limited use of chemicals, is also the most sustainable shower. And this is no magics. You don't need to think about a special wisdom of God, although it does not exclude it. It's simply the result of co-evolution. It is only normal that the human being, in its physiological and psychological components, is in good shape if he's in tune with the system in which it has co-evolved. Another example to make things clear, imagine a very hot day. I like hiking, and I suppose that many of you do as well. It's a very hot day, and you are looking for a service that we identify solely as refrigeration. You want fresher air. This is the only thing that you visualize. And in the modern society, you're tempted to get this service entering into a shopping mall, a, you know, one of those commercial centers where there is air conditioning. And indeed, there you will find this service that you have identified. But it comes with a price. Normally, you're sneezing, you have temperature shocks. The sound panorama is not good for your mental state and many other things. But if in the same day, instead of entering the shopping mall, you place yourself beneath two trees, suddenly you will find a service that goes way beyond what you have visualized. The temperature is felt as perfect. And pleasant, together with the humidity rate, which coincides with all our needs, together with the sound panorama that suits our health, together with the visuals, and so on. It is not by chance. We have co-evolved with trees for millions of years, well, hundred thousands of years, but we've only co-evolved with shopping centers just for 20 years. And we are not smart enough to identify all of our needs. So there is a very strong deep link between individual well-being, as can be described as health, and sustainability. Whenever you really respect your needs and build your health, you are by definition sustainable. But this looks like something which is exclusively personal, an encouragement to be sustainable because in the end it will make you feel better. The implications are geostrategic. They are very deep. Let us imagine for a minute that the rich world that can afford such choices decides to eat healthily according to the food pyramid. They're not thinking about, conflicts, the future of the planet, climate change, or anything like that. They're just thinking about their own direct convenience. There are personal advantages that arrive. For instance, OCDE certifies that a healthy diet increases your chances of success in studies and work by 13%. But then you will have less expenses. I mean, if you eat healthily, you have a higher probability not to be at the doctor, not to be buying medicines, and then it also gives you a psychological state which is much more favorable to having a good life in family. And so far, it's personal, but let's make it collective. Imagine an important portion of the population strikes this choice. I will eat healthily. Collective advantages start to come. The first one is a very heavy diminution of taxes. And this is due to a strange fact. We are so scared about the human population becoming 9.5 billion people by 2050. But if we observe the situation, it's kind of a paradox. Right now, we produce enough calories to feed 12 billion people. But we produce them and we distribute them in a very strange way. We produce and distribute them so that in the world there are 2 billion people who are sick because of a lousy nutrition, because they eat too much or they eat too bad. Obesity, cardiopathologies, and all the rest of things that you perfectly know. Only obesity costs public health services worldwide the equivalent of the GDP of Italy. We are not the largest nation, but we're still the seventh economy in the world. It's equivalent to the absence from work of 76 million people every year. So just by subtracting all the consequences of obesity, to say nothing of all the rest of diseases which are linked to poor nutrition, your taxes would diminish a lot more. But they would diminish even more, infinitely more, because there is another extremity, another polarization. In front of 2 billion people who are sick for eating too much and too bad, there is 1 billion people who is in food insecurity. And their poverty, their insecurity also weighs on our taxes very much. It is because of their insecurity that we have to finance things like development cooperation, armies, secret services, Frontex, and all these things. But how are these two poles connected? Well, just imagine that I decide to give up participating in a market that boasts selling 1 million hamburger per minute. To sell this quantity of meat, it cannot be good quality meat. It's built out of the suffering of 70 billion animals whose, well, I cannot use any other word, and whose factories emit a lot of very harmful substances, ammonia, pools, all the carbon emissions due to transportation, the packaging, and all the rest. So I would subtract my weight from all these problems, but above all, I subtract my weight from the problem that to produce so much lousy meat, there is not enough land there where people can eat this lousy meat. This, even with industrial farming, you need to give fodder, in Italian mangimi, to these 70 billion animals, but there is not enough land there where we eat this excess food. So what do you have to do? To produce enough fodder, for instance, you have to burn Amazonia. And we might be tempted to say that former President Bolsonaro was not a good person because he allowed burning Amazonia. But even if in his place there was Saint Francis, nobody is able to resist the power of market. So if we are burning down Amazonia, it's because we want to destroy our health by overeating lousy, poisonous meat of this kind. And meat is just an example. I mean, I'm talking about excess in general. But Amazonia is not enough. We have to go and buy for very cheap lands in countries which are poor. And so we destroy their food sovereignty, their security, together with the lands. Normally, we take control of water. And all this is driven by the market. So the moment in which we make just one single decision is I want to be healthy. Nothing more than that. I want to be healthy. By definition, I am sustainable if I'm really healthy, if I respect my nature, because my nature is tuned with the ecosystem. But being sustainable does not mean that in absolute terms, I weigh less on the resources of the world. It means that I give up the excess which is harmful to me. This excess does not stay just unconsumed. It's redistributed by the system to those who need it. All these proteins which are harmful to me will be redistributed by the system to those who need it. But so if I care about my well-being, I build sustainability. Sustainability is basically a redistribution towards those who need it, which means justice. And it is now no mystery that the real causes of wars, which are happening, the real causes of forced population movements are not really political ideologies or the rare earths or minerals or things like that. Conflicts are rooted into insecurity, into lack of justice, lack of equality. So my own choice to be in good health automatically builds the health of the environment, which automatically builds justice, which automatically takes away the causes for conflict. And this is why I can tell you, I was not honest when I accepted to speak in this Congress. Actually, I hesitated. I know absolutely nothing specifically about tropical diseases. But it was for me an opportunity to tell you something. You know, we work in politics and we might be saying, you know, climate change is dangerous. There will be tipping points and there will be, people do not get it because it's not a personal message. There is this very dysfunctional mechanism inside ourselves that makes us transform a collective danger in no one's danger. It does not concern me. It concerns the presidents, the United Nations. But you're the best suited to send out the only message that could mobilize people. What's good for you is good for your planet. We're not going to solve it with the United Nations or with the Paris Agreement. We're going to solve it if you finally realize that the only thing you have to do to take away lack of justice, to take away wars, to take away migrations, and to protect your planet is respect yourself and be healthy. Thank you so much.
So thank you, Professor Mastroianni. I personally, but I think all the audience really appreciated this kind of intervention, even if it was not directly connected to NTDs. This was that kind of intervention that we desired. So thank you very much. So now we have 4 or 5 minutes if there's some question from the audience. Otherwise, I can start with one question. If I have to be honest, you partially answered this question at the end of your presentation because we, as a young group of researchers, we always focus on raising awareness about NTDs through webinars, workshops, participation at scientific congresses, and something like that. But basically, we are a scientific community, and we often think just about the field of life science, of our scientific field. So we have a question for you as a journalist, as a diplomat, and is that what can we do? Do you have any suggestion for us of what we can do to try to reach a broader audience and to try to pass this message, the same that you passed us in this intervention? Do you have any suggestion for us?
Let me just tell you that the role of doctors and even in the negotiations is growing. At the last COPs, I've seen doctors doing things which are fantastic, including a group of doctors wearing their white, I don't know how to say camice in English, and injecting some medicine in a planet or things like that. But the problem is this, we've been alerting everyone, politicians, population, etc., about all these dangers. But as I was telling you, the message passed intellectually, but did not really mobilize action. And there are studies about that. You're only mobilized if the message becomes personal. I mean, you're the custodians of the one thing that people are more worried about. So if you find a way to make it comprehensible to people, the concept of One Health, because there is this terrible stopping factor. People feel it like that. Because the world is crumbling, I will have to give up the beautiful things of life. But it's exactly the contrary. We're destroying the world because we are poisoning our lives. This message is simple. But again, if I'm giving it in conferences, white public conferences, and okay, people. But one thing is if I give it like that. One thing is if your doctor tells it. It's you have a huge power of mobilization that the political class, that the journalists, that the professors don't have with your patients, but even more. I mean, if you talk as doctors, you're listened to. If you see, for instance, on social media, the posts concerning health, and this shows that mankind is a little bit stupid, are only second to posts concerning entertainment. And after health, there is wealth. So the ranking is entertainment, health, wealth. So the number two for influence in social media. If you could pass this message, I mean, it's up to you to make the difference, and you don't have to be scared. Because actually, all that is demanded from you is to be happier, to be healthier.
Thank you very much. We are trying to do our best also using social media, if I have to be honest, but we will try to do even better. So, is there any other question from the audience? Okay, I think maybe not. So thank you again, Professor Mastroianni, for your presentation. It was a pleasure for us to have you here today.
My pleasure.
I think we can maybe go to the second presentation. So please, Eleonora.
Now it's a pleasure to introduce Professor Camila Gonzalez Rosas. He is an associate professor and former director of the Department of Biological Science at the Universidad de los Andes in Bogotá, Colombia. As a biologist, she is specialized in ecoepidemiology and vector-borne neglected tropical diseases. Her research focuses on the ecology, distribution, and transmission dynamics of Leishmania, Trypanosoma cruzi, arboviruses, and the venomous Lonomia caterpillars. She has led and co-led national and international research projects on climate-sensitive infectious diseases and species distribution modeling. And today she will share a presentation entitled Climate-Driven Futures, How Environmental Changes Shapes Vector-Borne Neglected Tropical Diseases. So please, Professor, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Eleonora, and hi, everyone. I'm seeing some friends here around. So, can you see the presentation?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay. So thank you so much for the invitation. Today I will be sharing with you some evidence on how environmental changes and climate change impact on vector-borne diseases. In this image, as you can see, we are showing how with climate change we will have an increase in the distribution of vector-borne diseases because vector will have shifts in their distribution, and this will take pathogens to vulnerable populations. So this is a general framework of what we are seeing, but I will share with you some evidence, and in particular relating to the European scenario. So in 2016, we had the Paris Agreement where 195 nations agreed to keep the increase in temperature just to 1.5 degrees Celsius. But the past year, in 2025, just 10 years after this agreement was signed, we experienced shifts in temperature to 1.3, 1.4 degrees Celsius. So we can conclude that we failed to cut emissions and that we are approaching the limit before we had expected. So for Europe, what we know is that Europe is warming at twice the rate of the global average, and that if we would like to achieve net zero by 2040, we would need to fall by 3 times the current rate of Europe's energy emissions. For the first time in 2023, during the Convention of United Nations on Climate Change, the COP28, we started to see that health was included as one of the subjects that we needed to address from the climate change perspective. So this is to show you that we have been really slow to recognize the importance of climate on human health. Regarding these agreements, on 2021, to accompany this Paris Agreement, the Lancet Countdown was created. This is an initiative where different countries collaborate and researchers are tracking these indicators to try to highlight the negative impacts of climate change on human health. This is funded by the Wellcome Trust, and each region is providing a report yearly to try to show how these changes are being tracked. And in particular, it is interesting that they have this section on climate-sensitive infectious diseases. And within this section, we have 3 diseases or group of diseases that belong to this neglected tropical diseases group, which are West Nile virus, dengue, chikungunya, and Zika, and leishmaniasis. So I will show you very briefly some of these reports. As you know, vectors are arthropods, so they are ectothermic, and that's why this particular group of diseases are affected by climate. So what we know is that if we have increasing temperatures, we will have diminished incubation periods for pathogens, shorter life cycles for vectors, but we will also have an increase in the survival of these vectors Also increased survival of pathogens. We will have increased reproduction rates. We will have increased abundance and geographic ranges, and we will have an increased transmission risk. So we know that climate impacts on vector-borne diseases by increasing transmission seasons and distribution ranges. But additionally, we know that other factors are influencing this distribution or impact of vector-borne diseases. For instance, we know that globalization is bringing new species to new regions, and some of these species can be pathogens, but also disease vectors. So we know that we are experiencing both expansions and contractions for the distribution ranges of vector-borne diseases. We will have also rapid changes in populations, which will also impact the susceptible populations to these diseases. And in particular, in Europe, we know that we are experiencing shifts in the spatial and temporal distribution and prevalence of these diseases. However, we don't have a strong evidence on how these effects of climate affect these vector-borne diseases. We have many general patterns and I would say kind of evidence that we don't know the causal relationship between them. So we need to keep evaluating these impacts, and we need to assess the long and short term of climate on diseases. To begin with the three groups of diseases that we were talking before, West Nile virus is a good example of how these diseases are changing with climate. So you know that in Europe there have been different epidemics, and that in 2022, the last epidemic included 104 deaths. So this is one of the viruses that need to be closely monitored. We know that Culex pipiens complex is the group of vectors that are responsible for transmission. And in this work that was done by a friend and colleague, Diana Eraso, they tried to evaluate how climate was in fact affecting the distribution of West Nile virus in Europe. So they modeled the distribution of the disease using existing data, and they had a counterfactual scenario where climate was not affecting the distribution. And what you can see here is that there is in fact an increase in the area suitable for West Nile virus during the evaluated period, strongly correlated to climate. So also they concluded that West Nile virus outbreaks in Europe were benefiting from irrigated croplands and fragmented forests, and that biodiversity loss was promoting transmission by decreasing the diversity of the host community and increasing the vector-host encounter rate. For this disease, the Lancet Countdown has several indicators, but so they concluded that there was there has been a relative increase in the risk of outbreaks of West Nile virus when comparing the baseline, and the increase was of 265%. And as you can see here, the region of Eastern Europe will be the most affected. So they show that there has been a large increase in the intensity, frequency, and geographical expansion of West Nile virus, that high temperatures accelerate the capacity of West Nile virus vectors, and that increasingly dry conditions promote contact between the birds and mosquitoes around water sources. For dengue, chikungunya, and Zika viruses, the most relevant actor is Aedes albopictus. You know, and as you can see in the maps provided by the ECDC, this species is widely distributed, while Aedes aegypti is still not a very strong threat. The information that we have from the Lancet Countdown is that in 2022, we had 65 autochthonous cases in France, and their projections show that for the R North, we will have an increase of 55.94% in the period that they are evaluating compared with the baseline. So this is a very high increase in the risk for dengue outbreaks. Also, they have seen that the duration of dengue transmission season has extended by 0.4 months, that imported cases have increased by 176%. And as you can see here in the graph, they show that Southern Europe will have the largest absolute increase for this R North prediction. And lastly, last year in Italy, they recorded nearly, well, you recorded nearly 150 local cases in a single town, and also France continues to see local clusters, so dengue is a threat for Europe as well. And regarding leishmaniasis, which is the disease that I have been working with, in Europe, we know that Leishman infantum is endemic. Sandfly species are located in regions that have temperatures above 15 degrees Celsius, but also for sandflies, there has been an expansion of the distribution range in Europe. And also we have the same patterns here in South America. So they have already reported sandflies distributed in higher altitudes. And it is expected that the number of regions that will be suitable will be increased by 65%. And also new localities have been identified north of the historical endemic zone. So we are having both latitudinal and altitudinal expansion. These are some of the works that historically have evaluated these changes in distribution for leishmaniasis, and as you can see, most predictions show latitudinal changes. However, for the tropical region, particularly in Colombia, some models that we have done show that the shifts will not be latitudinal but altitudinal. And so in this work, for example, we evaluated how the distribution of the two vector species for Leishmania infantums were going to be under climate change scenarios. And as you can see, these were predictions that we could make for different years. And what we see here is that the altitudinal shifts are the most relevant ones. Then we decided also to make some predictions for Lutzomia longipalpis, which is the main vector for Leishmania infantum in the Americas. And here we try to predict if on a larger geographical area there will be some latitudinal distributions, but as you can see in the dark blue, we have the areas where the species is distributed in the present, but also in the future, and only the red areas are the ones where expansion is predicted. So this is a very interesting case, but because also for the previous models that I showed you before, it doesn't seem that this vector will increase its distribution. And on the contrary, for some regions which will become hotter, the vector will decrease its distribution. So this is to show you that we don't have general patterns. And this is the last work that we did with my colleagues in Rome. It was published last year. And here we were evaluating how was going to be the scenario of leishmaniasis vectors in Italy. And as you can see here, this map is showing the predictions where multiple species will coincide. And this is important because usually you could think that if you have more vector species, you will have a larger risk. But what we are knowing now is that perhaps having more species doesn't really mean that we will have there an increased transmission. but we need to focus on the species, on the specific species that is having their changes on a local scale. So I will show you two of the results of these models. For Phlebotomus perniciosus, as you can see, we are also experiencing a larger distribution, a shift on the altitudinal distribution. So here in these graphs, you can see that we are predicting that this species will increase their altitudinal distribution. And for this particular species, the expansion, which is in red, is predicted in the central part of the continental part of Italy, but also you can see that in Sardinia and Sicily, we are having expansions. While for Phlebotomus perfilievi, there is also a relative increase in the altitudinal distribution, but as you can see here, the models are not so consistent. So one model is predicting an increased altitudinal distribution, while the other one is showing stability in the distribution. But you can also see that there are some regions where the species is predicted to increase the distribution. So with this information, what we conclude is that there is no general pattern on how vector species will respond to climate change. And I would make this recommendation. So we know that there is an expansion of the area suitable for transmission. But however, we need to perform integrated surveillance so that we can really track and detect these altitudinal and latitudinal changes. So as a prevention strategy for vector-borne diseases under climate change scenarios, we would need to constantly monitor in specific areas where we think that these changes will be more relevant or more visible, so that we can anticipate either the arrival of new species, the increases in vector population in some areas, or even the arrival of new pathogens. We also need to keep doing studies at the national level so that we can inform decision making. I know that these models on a large scale are very informative, but also we need to keep in mind that local information is key to inform decision making. Also, we know that it will be really costly and difficult to improve public health services. So we know that climate change will impact health, and this will challenge the health services. And a last concluding remark is that we know that perhaps we will also see a reinvasion by Aedes aegypti. And so we also need to monitor these mosquito species as well as keep monitoring Aedes albopictus, because perhaps these arbovirus will be one of the larger threats in the next years. So this, I'm open to questions.
Thank you, Professor Gonzalez Rosas. Also, this was a very interesting presentation on different vectors. I'm not an entomologist, so for me, what's really, really interesting and curious. So we have a few minutes for some questions. Please, Professor Marco Pombi.
Yes, thank you. Hey, thank you, Camilla, for the interesting talk. Just a question about what is your opinion concerning the integrated surveillance. So in terms of priority, how could you consider the real advantage that you can imagine in integrating the surveillance? So in terms of tools, what is needed to improve the actual surveillance, which is already available for several diseases such as West Nile virus?
Thank you, Marco. So what we see here, we are capturing the outbreak because we are having patients coming to the health system. So we are not doing a proper surveillance. Usually the entomological surveillance is reactive and is not helping to prevent those outbreaks. So I would say that we need to have an established monitoring. As I was mentioning, maybe we need to choose the places or the areas where we know that these shifts will have larger impact. For example, here in Colombia, where we have the Andean mountains and altitude is restricting the distribution, I would say that we need to establish the surveillance strategies in those areas where a small temperature change will open the door to these vectors to colonize. So perhaps in Italy also establish an altitudinal monitoring is a good strategy. And of course, we will need to be sampling vector species and pathogen species as well in an integrated way. So if you can have like a monthly surveillance monitoring, and you can identify vector species, but also the pathogens to see if you are having new vector species or if your known species are increasing their population densities, and then if the pathogen is coming also with these changes.
Thank you, Camila. Yes, I think that you're completely right. So the important aspect is also the point of entry. So sometimes these are not fully investigated, and the invasive species are quite often entering through these ways.
Yes.
I think we have time maybe for a last question, if there's any other question from the audience. Okay, otherwise, thank you again, Professor Gonzalez Rosas. We can maybe move to the last speaker of today. So please, Claudia, can you introduce him?
Thank you, Federica. I'm pleased to introduce the last but not least speaker. So Dr. Kurt Rittmeyer is a medical and public health scientist and senior specialist advisor for neglected tropical diseases at Médecins Sans Frontières Operational Center, Amsterdam. He has over 30 years of experience leading programs and operational research on leishmaniasis in East Africa and South Asia, with the aim to improve diagnostic algorithms, treatment, and patient management, particularly in resource-limited and conflict-affected settings. He has authored around 100 scientific publications, contributed to numerous WHO expert consultations, and is a recipient of the Eichmann Medal for Global Health Research. The title of his presentation today is Impact of Armed Conflict and Displacement on the Occurrence of Leishmaniasis. So I turn the floor over to Kurt.
Thank you for this introduction. Let me see how to share. I have a problem with sharing.
Are you not able to share with? You should have a green button. I think
Yes,
it's green
I
for
think
everyone with share.
when I press the button, then okay. Yeah.
Now we can see your screen.
Yeah. Do you see the presentation?
No, we see the Zoom page now.
Okay, let me try the other one. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, so I will give a brief presentation on the impact of armed conflict and displacement on the occurrence of leishmaniasis with some examples. I assume you already know something about leishmaniasis disease, as it is endemic in Italy. But there have been several studies, meta-analysis, looking at the correlation between conflict and disease incidence. And one study from Berry and Baring-Ford, they demonstrated that there was a more than 2 times higher incidence of cutaneous leishmaniasis in countries with a high level of conflict and terror. And for visceral leishmaniasis, it was even 6 times higher. And a more recent study showed that there was a more than 2 times increased risk of cutaneous leishmaniasis compared to low-level conflict. And that was, all associated with displacement and destruction of health infrastructure. On the maps on the right, you can see that there is the darker the color, the more intense the conflict, and this is clearly correlated with the size of the yellow dots, which is the number of cutaneous leishmaniasis cases. But there are several factors that contribute to this increased transmission of leishmaniasis. First, there is the population movement and immunity, which means that due to conflict, there are population displacements, and which can result in non-immune people moving to endemic areas and get infected, or infected people moving to non-endemic areas where the vector is present, so contributing to a new transmission of the disease. And I'll give some examples of that later. Other important factors are socioeconomic, poor housing and sanitation. During conflict, you see that especially in urban areas, there is no waste management, open sewerage, and this all leads to increased reproduction of the sandfly vector. Also, displaced camps with crowding of people stimulates and facilitates transmission. And then there are environmental factors which lead to an increased density of rodents and dogs that can be reservoir hosts. Now, an old example, but ones that we as MSF were confronted with in the late 80s and early 90s was a huge outbreak of visceral leishmaniasis in Western Upper Nile area in southern Sudan, where we were confronted with mass mortality, and where we did a series of retrospective mortality surveys, which resulted in an estimated 100,000 people who died due to visceral leishmaniasis in a 10 years period. There was 1/3 of the total population. And it was in an area where visceral leishmaniasis had never been reported before. So what were the factors that contributed to this immense outbreak? First, you need the vector. Well, during the 60s, there were massive floodings of the Nile, which decimated the acacia forests in large regions. And those acacia forests are the habitat of the sandfly vector. So after the 60s, there was a regrowth of those forests. At the same time, because of the conflict, because the population are mainly nomadic populations, which are with a lot of cattle. A lot of cattle was killed or stolen or moved elsewhere due to the conflict, which resulted in reduced grazing of the young acacia sprouts, and that also stimulated the regrowth of the acacia forests. And of course, during this period, there was no vector initiatives. So that was the vector. Then second, you need the parasite. which need to be introduced in an area where fistula leishmaniasis had never been reported before. Now, there was costs, and there are two sources of that. There was, when the war started, there were a lot of students from Western Upper Nile who were studying in Malakal, and they had to leave that area, and they went back home, and introducing the vector of the parasite with them from an endemic area into Western Upper Nile. The other source were soldiers that were stationed near the Ethiopian border, which is an endemic area, and they came back to fight in Western Upper Nile and also introduced the parasite there. Another reason is the susceptibility of the population, or contributed the transmission. And that was mainly due to the displacement. Because of the insecurity, the fighting, large numbers of displaced people, they seek safety and foraging of food in the acacia forests where they were infected. And then the high susceptibility to develop the clinical disease, fistula leishmaniasis. In the mid-80s, there was mass starvation. There were famines all over the Sahel region in Africa. And this malnutrition makes people immune suppressed and therefore more likely to develop the clinical disease. Because of the collapse of the health system, health status decreased, and no access for humanitarian aid during this intense period of fighting. So this all was like a perfect storm to create this huge outbreak, and all these factors that contributed to that are conflict related. But even after this big outbreak, the war continued and resulting in very poor access to care. And we did some modeling based on data of the early 2000s, where we calculated that only about 55% of the fistula leishmaniasis patients could access care. So that means that 91% of the death remained undetected. Then a more recent experience, also from South Sudan, in 2014. During a flare-up of the civil war in South Sudan in December 2013 to February 2014, there was very heavy fighting again around Malakal city, which caused tens of thousands of people in displacement. About 50,000 of them, they took refuge in the acacia woodlands south of Malakal. But that was during the transmission period, when the sandfly density is high and you have the highest levels of transmission, which is between February and May. And after that, they settled in Lankien, which is a village where MSF has a hospital, which is an area which is known to be hyper-endemic for fistula leishmaniasis. Now, what did we see? Several months after this displacement and transmission, so after an incubation period, in 2014, we saw a huge upsurge of our caseload of VL cases in our hospital, much higher than was reported before or would be reported afterwards. So in 1 year time, or even less than 1 year, we treated more than 6,000 fistula leishmaniasis cases during this outbreak in our hospital. Hospital was quite overwhelmed, especially considering that 23% of the fistula leishmaniasis cases had very severe complicated disease, which required quite complex treatment. Nevertheless, we were able to keep the mortality down to about 3%, considering that untreated fistula leishmaniasis is 100% fatal. So, yeah, important lessons is that during outbreaks, the first priority is early diagnosis and treatment, because then you can reduce case fatality rate from 100% to about 3% or lower. And that vector control is only a second priority, if not competitive with the strategy of early diagnosis and treatment. Now, from there, let me go to cutaneous leishmaniasis. Here you see a graph with the reported cutaneous leishmaniasis cases to the WHO per region. And there you see a huge increase in the number of reported cases, from around 70,000 in 1989 to well over 250,000 in recent years. And as you can see, this increase is entirely caused by an increase in reported cases from Middle East and North Africa. Now, what is actually happening there? And there, within the Eastern Mediterranean region, I made a division between countries with high levels of conflict and countries with no conflict. And there you see that this entire increase in CL cases is coming from countries that are in conflict, whereas in non-conflict countries, there was a relative decrease in the number of reported cases. And all this can be associated to population displacement and health system deterioration. Now, an example of the introduction of enteropenotic cutaneous leishmaniasis caused by Leishmania tropica in Pakistan, where we saw that during the war in Afghanistan in the 70s and 80s, we saw large outbreaks of Leishmania tropica CL in Afghan refugee camps in northwest Pakistan, where in those camps up to 45% of the refugees developed cutaneous leishmaniasis. And Leishmania tropica, although cutaneous leishmaniasis was endemic in Pakistan, it was mainly or only caused by Leishmania major, which is a zoonotic CL. But the Afghan refugees, they introduced enteropenotic CL into Pakistan, where the vector was widespread, Phlebotomus sargentii. So this could generate a local transmission of the disease. So this resulted in local transmission and outbreaks near the Afghan border, but also in cities with a large refugee influx. Syria is another famous example where the collapse of health systems and displacements caused a huge increase in the number of CL cases. In the graph, you can see that since the start of the civil war, there was a very significant increase of cases, with in some years up to 80,000 cases. In a country where, with 6.6 million internally displaced. And this is entirely due to a disruption of health services because of health services that were targeted and destroyed. So more than 55% of health facilities were destroyed or seriously damaged. There was resulted in a huge shortage of qualified health professionals, because 70% of health workers there fled the country and were refugees abroad. A lot of the health professionals were killed, and of course volunteers, they were trying to fill the gaps, but they were often not qualified or skilled. And then of course the whole medical supply was seriously disrupted. So in conclusion of this short presentation, if you look at the direct and indirect effects of conflict on leishmaniasis, then this strong correlation has several effects. So on transmission, so the displacement effect, the effect on the immune status of patients and the susceptibility, has an impact on access. So due to insecurity, the damaged health infrastructure, the effects on staff availability, then the impact of conflict on the environment, so vector reproduction, but also increase in reservoir hosts, and then further exacerbating factors like malnutrition and other infectious diseases, which can enhance the increased morbidity of cutaneous and visceral leishmaniasis and increased visceral leishmaniasis mortality. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rittmeyer. This was a really, really interesting presentation, especially because you showed us not only the impact of the country where the conflict is, but also the impact on the other countries. So it was really impressive for me to see all the factors that contribute to the spread of the leishmaniasis in a place with conflict. So now we can start maybe with the question. I see that there's a question from the audience. Professor Fusco, please.
Thanks a lot for the professor, still doctor, but thanks a lot. Hi, Kurt. Thanks a lot. This presentation was super interesting. And I was wondering, I mean, I really love the idea of the studies, and I know how complicated it is to get the data. And I was wondering if you expanded also similar concept to other entities, or you just focused on leishmaniasis because your interest is mainly leishmaniasis, or because of data accessibility, or because leishmaniasis normally interest more war conflict areas.
Yeah, thank you for this question, Daniela. No, leishmaniasis is my personal interest, and that's why I did the research. So I have not personally looked into the impact of conflict on other diseases, but I'm absolutely sure it's also there. But I don't have the data. Maybe as an example, once I was talking to some people, experts in Europe, talking about measles outbreaks in Africa, and they thought, that measles is eliminated, whereas we were confronted with huge outbreaks of measles in Democratic Republic of Congo and other African countries, and where vaccination programs have completely collapsed and are causing outbreaks of measles, but also diphtheria. But yeah, for other neglected diseases, I'm not an expert on that.
No, and sorry if I continue, it's just short. It's very important what you say, because one thing is the feeling that disrupting the health system leads to that, and one thing is proving. So I think it's very important what you prove for leishmaniasis with your data, because I mean, it's a very good way for advocating. So I was really inspired from what you showed. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Is there any other question? Okay, so thank you again, Dr. Rittmeyer, for your presentation, and thanks to all of the speakers. I think we are at the end of our session, and I want to thank the audience, I want to thank the speakers, and see you next time. Next appointment, I think it's next week.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Professor Maurelli.
Monday is the next appointment, and later I will send the mail for all the people. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, and goodbye, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank you
Goodbye.
to the speakers.
Bye bye.
Ciao ciao tutti.